coming from the person who kind of got their branding started off with the fourth dimension video, I think a lot of people would be a little bit surprised that I have a very different conception of where I think the future is heading than most people. I don't think that primarily it's going to be technology that is going to be the big driver of where we end up heading in the next 100 years or so. And, it's a very easy assumption to make. It's a very easy thing to say that, because of all the progress we've made, that's just going to continue exponentially. That's kind of the general status quo assumption, but I think the line of progress we're going to be entering is very different from that, and I don't think many people have really thought about this in much depth yet. And I think a lot of this general concept I want to talk about is kind of pivotal to my philosophy because I think of myself as more or less a futurist. I'm always kind of speculating about what can and should happen in the future. And I guess the reason most people might assume that there's going to be a lot of science videos on this channel, I'm not saying there never will, but it's not my primary interest. The reason there's not going to be a lot of science videos is because I just don't think that this is a primary avenue that humanity's going to be following. I think that the world is actually changing a lot more than people have even given recognition for it yet. And the fact that many people don't see this yet is actually kind of proof positive of some of my theories about the validity of more of a psychological shift in consciousness than a technological one. So what do I mean when I say a psychological shift in the future? Well, I mean that's going to be the way we change our attitudes, the way we approach life, perhaps laws, things of that nature that are more objective. Language usage, of course, is important. And I kind of think the psychological shift is more important than the technological one, just because it's so underrated, it's so underthought about, because people don't think about the concept of culture while they are operating within culture. They only think about culture as being something in the past, basically. They think about it as something separate from their own individuated state. But in reality, you aren't so much of an individual as you think you are. Many people essentially adopt their entire identity from the conceptual, cultural frameworks that exist, and they don't even know they do this. So the reason I say that this is going to be so important because it's under-recognized is because people have very little awareness of how much this affects their lives, how much this affects their decisions and thoughts. And culture's changing very quickly. Culture is always, it has to adapt, it has to constantly be formulating new ways to approach situations, new ways to formulate their thoughts and so on, because that's just how people grow, collectively. Is things don't really stay in one place. And in politics, for instance, the reason we stop talking about a lot of issues that are big important issues is because there's really just nothing that can be done in that field anymore. I mean, people have talked about it, they've had the disagreements have stuck, despite the arguments, and at a certain point, you just have no more functional arguments. I mean, even within those arguments, like, if you were to just keep crunching the numbers on, like, data and things over and over and over again, it would kind of drive people a little bit crazy. Like, people wouldn't really be able to stay objective. They would get tired of it. They would just want to move on to something else. And there's really only so much people can care about a particular issue. Basically, the whole problem of postmodernism is trying to figure out how an individual fits into the psychological construct of the group. Because, we only come at things from our own individual standpoint. One person can never be multiple people. You're always just yourself. And, no matter how much you want to think that you can change things, ultimately it comes down to what are people going to collectively decide on, what are we actually capable of doing. Like, the individual's concept of an issue and the problems they may want to solve do not necessarily represent the exact reality as it impacts everyone else. And we still have this frameworks of, we need politicians, we need leaders. We don't really operate on a more multiplicative scale in terms of, like, the people that can impact the world. That's just, how we operate, how we're used to, like, viewing singular people as, like, these objects of ideology, and they are the ones who embody something which so what I'm trying to say is, because of this, we don't really have fully actualized in everyone the ability to think for themselves, because there's no responsibility on individuals to have to think for themselves. It's really more important for people to kind of be able to posture to others that they are free thinkers, when in reality the amount of people who actually fall into that category are extremely low. So for now, we are just reliant on the ideological infrastructure created by individuals who embody certain things that we may believe in. Well, it's my opinion personally that the people who are actually going to represent effective thought leaders in this way are going to be the people who can teach people to think for themselves. Because, the current infrastructure is very limiting, because we put things into very black and white categories. We don't really complexify issues too greatly, because the more complexity you bring to an issue, the less digestible, the less quippy it is to people who just want to, parrot the talking points to each other. And this is not an effectual way to change the world, because, as I said before, people's ability to engage within this repetitive frameworks is limited. And I believe in the future, the way things are going to change is we're going to effectively readapt the way that we approach argumentation, thinking, culture itself. And it's just a fact that the fastest way to do this is to have as many people contributing to the creativity of the dialogue as possible. Because if we're just relying on specific individuals, well, they're limited, their thoughts are only going to bring us so far, and so on. But if you have people who prioritize not so much just like pushing a specific agenda and trying to enforce that and be like, yeah, we're going to do this thing with this narrative, typical political BS. I think ultimately people will kind of start to feel like they're being used because they aren't really capable of creating the changes they want to believe in. Like there's this kind of patriotism complex that's very common, and it kind of has this everlasting belief that if we just believe in things strongly and follow whatever our hearts tell us is best, then everything will work out perfectly. But in reality, a lot of the things that happen in culture are kind of just reflexive, really, and they're not grounded in logic, and most of our ways of engaging with the culture are very lackluster in terms of capability to get people to think outside of the box. So, in spite of all of this, why do I think the psychological part is going to be the prime driver of the future? Because it kind of has to be. I think that if we really metacognize about this issue, we need to realize that our development in this way is actually pivotal to our ability to think clearly and develop solutions for the future. And if we're only relying on other people and external solutions outside of our own ability to think about them, then we're kind of going to be permanently stuck in like our one avenue of evolution, which would be very unfortunate. I think that the human species is very creative. I think we have a lot more room to be exploring what we can and can't do on this planet outside of just the very basic political and cultural frameworks that we've developed. So all I'm basically trying to say here is, if we're thinking about evolution, we should start to think of it on how we're going to get as many people as possible thinking at a greater level. And I mean, ask yourself, if you really think that technology is the only way humans are going to be evolving, don't you think we're kind of going to end up in like the Wall-E timeline, if you've ever seen that movie? And that was a very dystopian timeline. I don't think that reliance on technology is like the way forward. And this isn't to say that there won't be technological developments. I think there's going to be some that are pretty significant. I just don't think it's going to be like the prime determinant of who we're going to be going forward. We're not going to live in a sci-fi future where everyone's just plugged into some computer and they live their whole life in another reality where everything that they can ever dream of is given to them. I don't think that's ever going to be the case. So if you have any understanding of political theory, you might notice a lot of the concepts of what I've been referencing in this video have to do with populism. And as I kind of described in my previous video where I went into the whole political compass thing, link up there or whatever, populism is, fundamentally it's the way in which an individual decides to take up the political aims of a group and basically channels their energy into their own particular direction. And so the person I chose to represent this ideology in modern times was Elon Musk. And so getting back to the main point of this video, technology has kind of been, like I said before, it's been the thing that we've been pretty much putting our faith into collectively to be the thing which carries us forward. And so Elon Musk is basically capitalizing on this, literally and figuratively, in order to get people to believe in the causes that he is instigating. You want to go to Mars, electric cars, all these fancy things. He has a lot of kind of infrastructure-based projects he wants to pursue, and this is kind of, to me, a delusion of sorts. And the reason I say this is not because I think that Elon Musk is a terrible guy. I don't think that, he's doing a lot of things wrong right now. I mean, he runs a corporation and it's successful, so that's fine. I mean, I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with that. But my problem is that the hope that he's sowing in people with all these very grandiose projects is ultimately futile. And it's futile on the basis of reality itself. I don't think that it's physically possible to go to Mars or to realize like most of the theoretical plans he's outlined. But the reason these things are so popular and the reason he can get away with this is because these things kind of appeal to this sentiment we've built of the future, where technology is going to be the center point through which we build civilization. And this leads, when you have like a delusional belief, you kind of want to put as many eggs in that basket as you can, because delusional beliefs are very appeasing to the ego. They make you feel comfortable in a world that's uncertain. That's the effectual purpose of a delusion. It's to assuage one in the face of a reality that you cannot cope with. And the reality that we cannot cope with right now is the fact that evolution is not something that's going to be given to us. I mean, yeah, we were able to do that for a while. The advent of electricity, computers, etc. That's wonderful. But ultimately, and even just in that particular avenue of computers and such, it does come down to us to actually create value for those technologies. What's a computer? It's an avenue for text, video, music, etc. The computer is just an avenue through which we can accelerate our ability to do all these things which we've already done, like communicate. And so what I'm saying is, even though the computer has been a very effectual medium, it's ultimately been up to our own psychological growth and our own ability to come up with novel ways of thinking and approaching issues, which has made the computer something significant. The computer on its own is nothing, really. I mean, you can organize spreadsheets, I guess. That's cool. Other than that, it just comes down to people and their own ability to think. I mean, what's Twitter? It's a mass place to develop our ability to think. And the only reason it has value is because people go on this platform and constantly pour energy, pour their own thoughts and problem-solving abilities into it to make it valuable. But my whole point with this is basically that technology is not some kind of omni-messiah that's going to bring us to the utopian age of no more resource depletion, no more war, conflict, etc. All those things ultimately have to fall on our own responsibility and our own ability to collectively learn how to live together and use our problem-solving abilities and psychological capability to evolve. And if you're just relying on technology and that's it, then, I mean, what are you even doing? I mean, unless you are yourself like a scientist or researcher of some kind who's putting in the effort, why should you like expect to receive all of these blessings from the future of technology right into your lap? I mean, I guess this is just the consequence of consumer culture. Is you get used to this way of evolution via consumption. So to get back to politics for a bit, I want to go more into like why it's actually hard to get people to think about things from more perspectives. So, in case you haven't noticed at all, the way politics have been talked about online has shifted very dramatically, I'd say, since roughly about when Trump got elected, maybe a bit before. But see, when it was more in the era of like Bush or even Obama, we kind of elected presidents more on the basis of like very concrete policy positions, and it wasn't so much about like a culture war, I guess is, the modern cultural miasma we're dealing with here. I mean, don't misunderstand me, there were definitely discussions around social issues, but it's taken on a different kind of framing today, and it's become not so much about policy so much as the feeling you can inspire in people, and do they feel comfortable investing their belief in a person, because their belief has basically become a weapon of some sort. It's no longer even really about things that feel kind of far off, like the war in Iraq or whatever. It's more about things that have been made very in your face, very personal. And so when people engage in political discourse today, they want to feel like what they're doing is contributing to some kind of movement whereby the culture itself is shifting. In fact, they're not even really trying so much to win political seats, I don't think. I think what it actually is they're trying to use political seats to win people. They want to actually change as many individuals to their side of the political aisle as possible. And that's what the real culture war is. I mean, yeah, you get the results of this, which are policy positions and such, but the real battlegrounds here is not really so much in the voting booth. Where it actually is now is the cultural movements itself, the way people think, the way that we actually format our collective ability to look at reality. And, for all that can be said about the culture war, I think it's interesting in the sense that it's a very new kind of phenomenon. It's something that could only really have existed in the era of the internet. And, now that we have the internet widespread, it's kind of just taken off. It's become the mainlined way with which we engage with politics. So what I'm trying to suggest here is that this is kind of a trend for the future. It's not just even about the culture war on like a spiritual level, I guess. It's more about how are we going to learn to work together as a collective? What tools do we have to make individuals capable of thinking in a way that adds to the conversation? Are we personally growing our opinions and ways to think? And do these things contribute to some kind of a larger vision for society? And also, can we use this concept in a way which is less limiting than our current conception of it can allow us to consider? And kind of to my own discredit here, I want to say that even though the nature of it right now is very conflict-oriented I don't think that's actually how people really feel. I kind of just feel it's like affrontatious, like they're doing it as a performative gesture, and that is just the modus operandi through which we are using this current iteration of culture wars. I guess I think the real problem with this current way of operating, it's very conflict based, is it's very short sighted. Like, people approach every argument like it's life or death almost, and there really isn't much room for deviation. And I just think if people were to be a little bit more expansive in their thinking, you could get a lot more out of these conversations. But people are going to realize this. They're going to be frustrated enough, like visually frustrated with themselves and the situation, that they'll want to have a more expansive perspective, and they'll want to actually understand their opponent in a way that will enable them to more effectively beat them. And this actually, ironically enough, requires empathy. You have to be able to fully immerse yourself in the way the other person is thinking in order to better make them look stupid. So maybe it's not even that it's hard necessarily to get people to think about new ideas and new ways. Maybe it's more so that we're existing within this particular frameworks whereby your dignity or whatever is invested in appearing that you're not, like, considering things in different ways. It's important in your argumentative style to, I don't think this is necessary, but this is the tendency. It's important in your argumentative style to not practice visible empathy, to only tactically use this empathy to better understand the way the other person thinks. And ultimately that's what this is about, is developing a holistic understanding of how various groups in the culture think. And what we're actually doing when we debate all these issues, it's not even really about, again, the results. It's about figuring out where we all stand and what's going to work. So when people are arguing about, trans issues or whatever, and it's an issue that affects, like, realistically, like 1 in, 5,000 people might be trans, or at least, go through with procedures and such. But it's not about the issue itself. What it's about is, why do people have the moral systems they do? What's going to get them to change their mind? Where do compromises potentially exist? All of these things are getting outlined by this very mostly trivial argument. And the consequence of that is going to be that in the long term, we're going to have a different style of argumentation, and other issues that we will hyperfixate on in the future are going to be shaped by every argument we've had in the past. And I guess my message to my own audience in the context of all this would be, actually start to engage with as many different types of people as you can to develop your own holistic perspective of the world and of culture. And don't be afraid to get into arguments, and don't be afraid to have deviating opinions and all this, because this culture war apparatus is the springboard through which I think we're going to have the future developmental state of culture. Which is not an exaggeration. I don't think that this is as insignificant as any particular small issue. I think that just the fact that this exists and is so prominent in certain people's heads uh, is very telling of where our priorities lie and what we actually should be thinking about with regards to collectivized development. And there's actually a deep kind of irony to the fact that Elon did buy Twitter, which is now X. Just literally x.com is the website. And like, technology was his thing, right? And Twitter's a very basic technology. I mean, it doesn't operate on a very complex system. I mean, other than perhaps the algorithm itself, but the website itself couldn't be more basic. It's just text posted by people who you click to follow. That's it. That's literally all it is. And so this giant tech guy who says he's going to deliver us to Mars, and we're going to colonize the galaxy, all of this very complex hypothetical technological situations, and what he buys Twitter, right? Why do this thing given the context of everything that the people who believe in Elon Musk have invested their own sense of belief into? And the answer to me is very optimistic. I think that maybe this means that on some level the culture is going to shift away from this overdependence on technology for evolution into something that is more like the Twitter space, more about people to people interacting. So I think on this basis alone, I myself am kind of glad that Elon Musk bought Twitter. And it hasn't gotten any worse for me personally. I think the website's gotten algorithmically better. I think that it's more entertaining, honestly. And I'm not going to judge whatever aesthetic changes he's doing, because Twitter itself was, I don't know, is kind of not the most perfect representation of what the website meant anymore, because it's not really a very peaceful place. It's not a place where people are just spreading positive messages for each other, like tweets, like birds or whatever. It seems trivial, but I don't really care if he's going to change that. And I think the fact that people are saying that that's going to kill the platform, it comes from this place of, I think, deep-seated nihilism from these people. They don't actually know what Twitter represents, and they're just kind of feeding into this idea that anything Elon Musk does is going to be wrong, evil, horrible, because he's the billionaire, and billionaires are just intrinsically evil, right? But as I said, I think that this movement by him to buy Twitter kind of represents a positive shift for him, because I don't think that any of his ventures before were really that valuable, honestly. I mean, electric cars are nice, but they existed long before Tesla, and Mars is not going to happen. Okay, end of story. That's all I have to say about that. And he's kind of doing this as a business move. He wants to be seen as the cool guy, whatever. But that kind of a peer pressure on him to be seen as someone who's always pushing the envelope or whatever, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It might push him to do positive things for the website or whatever things he wants to do in the future. I'm not opposed to the general idea of Elon Musk doing positive things for the world. I just think that, like, the over-reliance, or like this fake kind of optimism that we've invested in technology, and kind of putting that onus on him as like an icon of technological development, I think that well, it's going to come to a head at some point, and people are going to have to get over it, and then we're going to have to contend with the fact that we're just people on the internet, and all we can really do is use our own heads, use our own perspective to maybe contribute some kind of shift to improve the state of things. So yeah, that's my complex theory about how the concept of a culture war online is going to get people to detach themselves from the populist mindset of requiring individuals to tell them what to think. Because the more people are investing themselves in the conversation, the less we need people to tell us what to think. This is just the next step on the road to making politicians obsolete, which will ultimately result in something resembling a decentralized form of government, aka anarchy, and I think that will work out just great for humanity.